So just to introduce myself, I'm Julie Young. I'm a research fellow from the University of East Anglia, where I've worked for over 20 years now with colleagues such as Beth Neal on many different projects connected to adoption. And this is the second webinar in a series of 3, and they all are focusing on different areas of maintaining relationships in adoption. So ideally, all 3 should be viewed to make sense of this complex and nuanced topic. If you have missed the first one, there is a recording on the NIROMP website, I believe, Sharon. So yeah, you can access that, and there will be another one, which I think I should have looked this up, but I think it was the 15th of January from memory. So yeah, so ideally view all 3 because they all do focus on slightly different areas. And we're running them in collaboration with Adoption England. And I am joined again today by Vicky Swift from Adoption England, and she's going to be helping me by keeping an eye on the chat. So she might be able to answer some questions or comment on anything that you put on there during this session. However, just to let you know, she'll be disappearing to another meeting at about 1, so you might suddenly find a bit more silence on the chat then, but I'll make sure I leave some time at the end so I can also look through or answer any questions verbally as well before we have to leave. So yeah, that's the format today, and as Sharon said, please do use the chat, not just for questions but also for comments, examples, anything that might benefit us all as a community of practice as well. Okay, so I'll move on then to the first slide of this session, which is a bit of a recap actually from the last webinar. So last time I focused on the more negative side of adoption, and because although we know adoption has many positives, research shows it's really good for children. Research has shown that for many people it also has this negative side or can raise long-lasting issues. So I shared lots of research and quotes which try to illustrate some of the difficulties that people can have, and we need to acknowledge those issues. We need to face up with them in order to try and eliminate or reduce them where we can, if we really want adoption to work for the best it can, have the best outcomes possible for children, young people and adults. And we know people's experiences are very diverse in adoption, but what is really common is seeing themes of rejection, of loss, trust in people, poor self-esteem, fear of the unknown, or issues around identity, a lot of struggling with why was I adopted. All this is really commonly raised in research with adopted young people and adults, as with any other care experienced young people as well. And these are issues that can arise or peak at different parts of their life as well. And we do need to think across their lifetime, because adoption, has that unique aspect to it in the care system of being forever, for life. So it's really important we are thinking ahead and addressing issues that might maybe not come up right now, but might come up later for them. And we know that these issues can be made worse without contact, and that is what we tend to have. Even today, even with our letter systems that we set up, we do end up typically, as time goes on, to have an adoption without contact, as I'll be talking a bit more about today. So yes, that's what we're facing up with. I also just shared briefly last time as well about birth relatives and other parents and other relatives can find it harder to cope with the loss of their child when there's no information about them at all. They kind of disappear, and that's it. And also adoptive parents also can find it more difficult to support their child around questions or curiosity, all these issues. They can find it more difficult to initiate conversation with their child when they know so little about their birth family, when they don't know how to bring it up. So all these are problems that we need to really recognise and really try to work with, because if we don't, then we can end up with children with unmet needs trying to resolve these issues for themselves, and whether that's reaching out to birth parents in their early teens or just having to cope with it. Even if they wait to young adulthood, they can still be very vulnerable and on their own with these issues, and sometimes there are devastating consequences. I shared some research both from the UK, both from our research and other areas in the UK, but also across the world as well, where face-to-face contact is more common in places like America or New South Wales or Northern Ireland. And research is showing that there are benefits that can be gained from maintaining relationships. It can help with some of those issues that I focused on in the last session. So it can help children and young people by not cutting off relationships. So avoiding this notion to children that people can just disappear, which can be very damaging and can be interpreted as rejection, being unloved. Relationships that continue can help children to feel they were cared about, they weren't just unloved and rejected. It can also help them enjoy a relationship with people who are biologically related to them, whether it is parents or whether it's siblings or grandparents. So they develop a shared history of memories over their childhood and not just try to attempt to start relationships later in life after reunion, which can be really difficult with strangers. It can also answer their questions, so help with that curiosity. I shared examples last time of how it can help them understand why they were adopted, either because they can see the issues or they can hear about the issues from other relatives in the family who can really help them understand what went wrong, or from older siblings who might have experienced longer time in the care of their parents as well. And most importantly, it can really help them trust the system, trust in their adoptive parents, trust they have the truth and not wondering about this other side. So lots of positives that were shared with various quotes and research last time. Also, we saw examples of how it can help adoptive parents as well, giving them information and triggers, things to stimulate conversations with the child, keep things open, help them to share their thoughts, worries and emotions, really demonstrate if people are maintaining relationships with the birth family, it's a real demonstration to children that this is okay to talk about. I'm maintaining relationships with your birth family because I recognize they're important to you. So it's about the really important message it gives the child that you are not on your own. We are going to process this together, go through this together. And all this is really important because children and adopted young people and adults tell us that open communication is the most important thing in adoptive parenting. People say it brings them closer to their parents. Research shows that open communication is strongly linked to good outcomes in adoption. So if it can help with that, then that's really something we must consider. And also, we've seen in research how it can help birth relatives as well deal with their grief, help them cope with adoption because they can see their child, see how they're doing, have a role still in their life in some way. It can reduce that ambiguous loss that can be really hard to resolve. I shared this review, just one review, which has looked at contact. There's been other reviews as well, but all saying fairly similar things, really. It's not just about whether contact is good and what sort, but it's about making sure it's good quality, whatever sort it is. Post-adoption contact generally has little relevance to young people's overall development in adoption. Whether young people are doing well when in studies, it's far more to do with things like the impact of early harm, changes in placement, etc. But what we do know about contact is it has the potential to be very beneficial and mitigate with some of those issues, but not in every case. It's positive experiences that matter. Setting it up with people who can make it positive, or setting it up in a way, setting up in a way that makes it positive. So it's about looking for those ways, looking for those people that we can try to make sure it's right for this child. Just like we might really think about relationships with any family. You know, we have to think through when we take our children to visit elderly relatives with dementia, or people who we may not get on with in our family, but we have to get together at Christmas. We're thinking through how can we make this positive, and that's what we should be thinking of with contact or maintaining relationships in adoption as well. how can we do it if possible? Because we know that basically not having a gap, having some connection if possible and safe and meaningful is really important. And I also shared last time that lots of research shows it's how young people feel about contact matters, whether they're satisfied with it, whether they're seeing who they want to see. That's what matters, but that's also really challenging to pick up because children don't share their feelings very easily. They're looking to see what their adults want, looking to see what they're happy with. They can feel guilty for thinking about birth parents or fearful of the truth that's in this sort of murky secret world. So can really hold back from saying their feelings. So it's easy to put this on a screen, but much more difficult to kind of work out in practice. So that's where we sort of get to with the reviews, really, that it's not, you know, do we need to have contact? Yes, we do, if possible and in the right way. And there's always going to be, as I shared last time, again, there's going to be challenges with it. It's tricky, emotional territory, or nearly always. I mean, there are some relationships which can just pass along quite easily, as I shared last time with a young girl and her grandmother, just fun, lovely times with grandmother. But there can also be challenges in many relationships, and it's about getting that balance right, making sure that at least the benefits outweigh the challenges, and having a long-term view, because sometimes awkward and tricky contact can be difficult in the short term, but actually when you look back, when you're an adolescent, and you can think, yeah, actually I know why I had to be adopted. I know the grass isn't greener on the other side. I've got this relationship which is kind of in my life. It's okay. So it's about getting that balance right, having a long-term view, but also maybe pausing contact or changing it if you need to, because the balance can change over the years, taking a long-term view. My next webinar will be talking more about making decisions around contact planning, how we can achieve this overall positive contact plan. So yeah, some more detail on all that, weighing up the benefits and the challenges a bit more later. So we do end up with a closed system here in England and Wales, at least. Northern Ireland, it's much more common to have face-to-face contact with parents as well as other relatives. But in this country, we have been really formulaic about it, and it's been letterbox. But we know from research that we've done and research that other people have done that it often doesn't work out very well. In many cases, it doesn't even get started. If it does, it often stops. So, for example, one study we did in the Yorkshire and Humberside area, we found that in a survey we did with adoptive parents, less than half had experienced any two-way letter contact with the birth family. And we set the bar really low. It was getting anything back from the birth relative at any time. So just one letter or one card at least. So less than half had anything that could be called two-way at some point at all. And a third of those had stopped by the time of the survey as well. So lots of examples of it just not carrying on. There were examples of it working well, and people really developing a good information exchange, but it just seems to be rare for that to happen. It's got to be people who are really invested in it, really getting support, really understand its purpose over the long term as well. Lots of people weren't involving their children in it, and they didn't then know how to start involving their children, how to announce that they'd been getting these letters. So it was something you could easily sort of keep away and then get into sticky situations about how you suddenly start introducing it. So lots of awkwardness about it, lots of words that were misinterpreted or people not really understanding each other. And when I say it's letterbox exchanges set up with first parents, it does tend to be mothers as well. I pointed out that fathers are less involved in contact last time as well. So face-to-face, really rare in adoption, and it's quite a contrast when you do look at other permanent care settings, family settings for children, whether it's kinship care, special guardianship order, long-term foster care. It's kind of very different in that way, and it's different in other countries as well. Even though it can be the same families, we can be adopting children from a family where other children are in a kinship care family, and I'll talk more about that later really. What we do know from the studies we've done is that face-to-face contact is actually more likely to keep going, seems more meaningful, it actually seems easier for some people. We often think it's going to be the trickier one, but for some people it's actually easier. It's also more likely to keep going with extended first family members as well, even though, as you know, it's really rare to include small percentages in some of the studies we've done with anyone that's not a parent, aunts, uncles, grandparents. And yet when we are including extended family, it's much more likely to be sustained over time. Contact with brothers and sisters does happen more frequently than with parents and other relatives, but usually only if they're in care or adopted, and very few are in touch with all their siblings. So it does seem that we are necessarily not really making the right decisions for children. If there's a difference between how we treat adopted children and how we treat children in other long-term permanent family settings, that it really must lead us to question what we're doing and why we're doing it this way. Lots of challenges around why letters are really difficult to write. I can see people have put in the chat about, you know, birth parents with learning difficulties. Who writes letters these days anyway? I don't know if I could sit down and write a difficult emotional letter to anyone, because our world is so different in the way we communicate now. And we know when we're talking about really emotional topics, how hard it is to get the words right when you're writing to strangers that you've never met, or a child who you've not seen since they were a tiny baby. What on earth can you say? And particularly if you're coming from a life where nothing has changed for you, what is your news? You might be getting letters about the adoptive family, holidays in Florida and horse riding lessons, and you've got no job, you haven't left your flat, you're just trying not to drink, or you're trying just to stay alive. How easy is that to write in a letter? Can't put into words what I want to say. People told us, we spoke to many, these are all quotes from a study we did. We've done a couple of studies where we talked to lots of different birth parents and other birth relatives, some of whom never ever wrote back. And it wasn't at all that they weren't thinking of their children, they didn't want to communicate with them. Some were even lighting candles on their birthday and wishing them well, blowing out the candle, but all on their own. They just could not put into words what they wanted to say or what they felt would be helpful, not even knowing what would be helpful, not even knowing if the adoptive family want a letter from them, feeling that this is all being forced upon them anyway. Really challenging to put all this into words, not being able to read and write, as people have been commenting on, and also having really difficult relationships with the whole sector that they felt took their children, that they felt they could not trust. So engaging with professionals was really difficult. So lots of challenges around that. And we know that the people that do get support, that can really help, and it can make it much more likely that they'll write back. But it's getting them into that support in the first place when they can be very wary of the whole professional sector is really challenging. What we did find quite strongly in one of the studies, we were looking at what the impact of having at least one initial face-to-face meeting between adults, what impact that had on each other. And we did find it had a huge effect. We found that nearly all first families left the meeting feeling positive, even though a lot of these people were incredibly angry towards the professional sector. But that didn't seem to go on to the adopters in virtually all cases. Most of them felt reassured their children would be loved and looked after, and they hadn't been reassured prior to that meeting. A lot of them hadn't been able to trust that the adopters would be properly assessed. They hadn't been able to trust that these strangers who want a strange child would truly love them. And a lot came away feeling so much more reassured about that. Some also felt reassured the child would be told about them. Because before that, they might have thought that they wouldn't be, that they were going to be lied to. Birth relatives often feel they've been lied to. How can they trust that things would be different for this child? But actually feeling that the adopters actually want to talk about the birth family and keep up contact, that they actually want to hear from them, was something that really came across in that meeting as well. Some felt their pain was acknowledged, they were respected by the adoptive parents. and some felt how much easier it was to respond. And when we looked at the figures, a greater proportion, a significantly greater proportion, did respond to the letters. And not all the meetings were set up brilliantly. There's a whole webinar that I conducted on these one-off meetings, which you can access if you would like to via Vicky Swift. She can give you the link to all the 14 webinars that we've done on maintaining relationships, and the power of initial meetings was seen as so significant. We felt it worthy of a whole separate webinar because they are so important. They're often only done at a very tricky time when people have just lost care proceedings or just taking on a child, and anxiety is running really high for both parties. Much more flexible agencies are starting to offer these one-off, or not to say one-off, but just another initial meeting, an initial meeting between adults at different times. And we found that could be really important. Sometimes it's not the right time just after care proceedings or around the adoption order. Sometimes it actually needs to be a year later. But how powerful it could be when we get adults actually face to face, if possible. It could really make a difference. So yeah, I definitely like to basically sell the the positivity around this. I could also talk more about the impact on the adoptive parents, but we don't have time for this right now. But there's much more in that other webinar. But if we can get adults together, it's so important. So that's definitely something I would really like to feel that everybody here listening to this is taking note of and trying to see, is it possible for them to meet? Even if you can't meet the birth parents, can you meet others in the of the family? What about other birth relatives? And if we can't do it at the time, can we set it up later, a year later, 2 years later? Are we revisiting this? And if we can't actually do it face to face, let's think about how we can somehow get the adults talking. Can we do a video call where we're blanking out faces, or can we do a phone call? I've heard about these kind of one-off meetings where people did a video call with someone in prison, and yeah, that was really valuable for people as well. So it's about trying to think creatively about these situations, but also really selling it to adoptive parents as well. So yeah, the importance of, if you meet, that can really help with ongoing contact, whatever contact it ends up being. And we need to think about adult to adult meetings actually at different stages too, and how helpful they can be. When we talk to young people about contact, they often are very unhappy with letter contact too. It doesn't feel very meaningful to them either. They often say they want something that's much more personal or meaningful, that brings the person to life. Here's a few quotes that we've picked up from young people. I feel the council censor it too much. It ends up being very superficial. There's nothing in there that really brings my parent to life. They're cutting out things like where they went on holiday or what activities they do, because they're so worried that they might be revealing things, that they say they end up with something that's quite meaningless and doesn't really feel we have a connection to these people, whereas they love the little details. My mum loves going to Blackpool Beach and eating ice cream, so they can picture it, have an image, feel connected in some way, but the systems can feel just far too interfering, and you sort of end up with this kind of business letter to parents, whereas they want something that's for them, really revealing of the character. They also were quite unhappy, some of the people we spoke to, with typed letters. They love to see handwriting, little personal quirks. They often find the timing overly restricted too. Oh, here's a quote about voices. This was shared by one of the young people we spoke to in a focus group. My social worker knows their voices, I don't. Those kind of concrete things like voices can really matter to people, and also they can feel that they're being prevented from knowing things that all these other people around them do know, and how unfair that can seem when it's my birth mum, my birth dad. They can feel it very overly restricted about timings as well. We spoke to young people who wanted to contact their birth parents when their GCSE results came out, when they won an award, when they did well in a sports event, but they felt it was this once a year letter doesn't really give us a chance to have a proper exchange. By the time that year comes, you've forgotten what you did even a month ago, and you can't really have a connection with people when it's just once a year. And then we also spoke to people who felt misled by letter contact as well, because it doesn't really show you the person. And one of the young people who took part in our longitudinal study had really enjoyed the letters she had from her mother throughout her life. Her adoptive parents had been very open and involved her in letter contact from the beginning, despite her really lots of awful things that happened in that birth family. But when she did meet this mum in her teens and was so excited to meet her, she found out she wasn't as amazing as she thought. I mean, it makes you wonder what would it have been like if she did have some face-to-face contact. I don't know whether that would have been the right thing for this particular mother either, but it's just something to bear in mind with, that some of the contact doesn't do what we want it to do. And maybe what this person needed was for someone to really understand what her parents were like. Was there other people in her wider family that might have helped her? So it's really making think, what are we doing with this letter contact? Is it going to achieve what we want? And sometimes we also support birth parents so much with letter writing, we're almost writing the letter for them, and that doesn't give them the right picture as well. And one example I love to share when I talk about children kind of gaining a sense of who their birth parents are through contact, I like to give the example of this young girl who received a present for her birthday from her birth mother through the post, because they just had letter contact. And it was a pair of knickers, but that were much too big for her. And she told us in the interview, that's when I really realized that my birth mum had problems. She couldn't even work out how old I was. And what that example did was to really give her a sense of, yeah, I get this, something really concrete. And of course, it was the conversation around that present as well, which made a difference. It wasn't just the present itself, it was adoptive parents using it as an opportunity to talk about the difficulties and explain about what learning difficulties or an inability to parent actually means. So concrete examples. So it's really stepping back and thinking, what do we want, and is letter exchange really going to be sustained over the long term and really make a difference? And if it isn't, then why are we setting people up to fail? What people are really dissatisfied with is when they're expecting something to happen and it doesn't. And if people do have an idea that people can't do this, then that can help at least. This is a really good example of how we can make completely different keeping in touch plans for children from the same family. This is an example actually from my current research, which is talking to teenagers and young adults who are raised under special guardianship order. So I actually spoke to the 17-year-old girl in this particular family. I did not speak to the adoptive child, so I don't get his point of view. But what I did have was a sense of the very different plans. Now, the 17-year-old I spoke to had moved to live with her maternal grandmother as a young baby, along with a very close in age older sister. And brother, as you can see, was born only 1 year later. Too much for grandmother to manage, and that was the reason why he was adopted. It was nothing to do with him being a boy or anything that grandma was rejecting him. It was just being able to cope with already two very small girls. And in fact, later on, the 17-year-old was joined by a much younger half sister as well. So grandmother did eventually have 3 girls that she's looking after. And all 3 girls also had regular meetups with mum. They had seen a bit of dad, although much less. He hadn't really maintained contact very well, and the girl I interviewed was quite negative about him. But with her mum, she said, well, I know she loves us, but she does have a funny way of showing it. She's got a kind of quite a bit of an insight into her mother's difficulties and issues. So that's the situation of the girls. What about the brother? He was removed at birth, placed with foster carers, and then adopted. Letter contact only, because that was what was done in adoption, despite it being the same family. So he's got this letter contact with mum, grandma, and his 3 sisters. I wonder what was going on for him, knowing that grandma had 3 sisters, but not him. If we think back to some of although I didn't interview him, we can think back to some of the quotes that I shared in my last webinar and how people might interpret the story that they're told. And the rejection that he might end up feeling. I don't know, because I didn't interview him, but it's quite possible. I spoke to the girl about the letter contact, and she said, well, we weren't meant to meet up because of everything. She really struggled with words here, but she said, well, it was unsafe, something like that, but I don't know the whole reason, in case one of us said something we shouldn't have. When I was younger, it felt a bit weird, because like writing letters and then getting letters, not being able to see him was just weird. I wanted to see him. So how strange. And she, talked about these letters as just being quite meaningless, really. She did like the photos, but it didn't really mean anything. He didn't feel like a brother, and she never really questioned it. It was like, oh, we must be a bit unsafe for him. I just hate to think what that image that gives you and how that impacts your self-esteem, that, I'm unsafe. And I heard this from other older siblings in that study as well, that we needed to be kept away because we might have traumatized our younger brother and sister. Anyway, by the time I interviewed her at 17, she had just had a reunion with her brother. How did it happen? Social media. Found someone who knew the brother, and it just all happened by chance. But luckily, this young girl, and I guess the brother too, were from adults who were very open with their communication. So although they started chatting via Snapchat together without telling the adults, it wasn't too long before they did reveal it. Sister told grandmother, because they did have a really nice open connection. So anyway, they told their adults, and a lovely supported meeting was set up with the brother at a lovely community venue. I think they did something like bowling, they ate at McDonald's or somewhere like that. And the adults kept back, the adults kind of left them to it, and it was done really well. It was lovely to see, but it only happened because of this chance kind of social media connection, that they happened to find someone who knew them both and connected them. What was it like to see him? It was really good. Did he feel like your brother? Yeah, it felt normal. We could talk about anything. But now that I've seen him, I want to see him again and not just stop seeing each other. Is there anything you wish had been different with him? Maybe like seeing him a bit more, so it wouldn't be so much to talk about now. I think because I went that long without seeing him, I just want to make up for the time that we didn't have together. Like make plans to see each other like every weekend, so that we're still in touch with each other. You can pick up this kind of urgency of, I need to know him now. And I felt, my goodness, he's doing his GCSEs. She's just started college. Is this the right time to suddenly have all this thrown at you? Sometimes we think, let our children have a carefree life without worrying about birth family. They can deal with this later. Is this really the right time? 16 and 17? It could have been 18, it could have been 19. Also very vulnerable times to suddenly have to start connecting or get this all thrown at you. And I couldn't help feeling what a shame they missed out on something that could have been so helpful for both of them. And also these sisters could have helped help him with knowing that their mum loves them, but has a funny way of showing it, as she told me, and what difference that could have made. So just a really powerful situation I wanted to share with you. And there was another, so that research on brothers and sisters, our adoption, we've done various studies on this, which fits with other research that's over half of children with siblings living elsewhere had no contact with any of their siblings, or had never received anything back in response to letters. I heard about situations where children wrote letters and didn't get anything back from the other family, which must be really sad. So we're not very good, are we, at keeping siblings in touch with each other, despite the law saying we should try to maintain siblings together in placement if at all possible. We should prioritize it in placement if at all possible, but when it comes to actually contact, it's almost like it slips off the radar. And some of the people who took part in this survey were saying that they actually did want to have the contact. They had tried, but they weren't getting it supported by other families, or social workers of children and siblings in care had moved on and they weren't keeping that connection. So it wasn't always because adoptive parents didn't want it. But it just wasn't that it was being properly supported. And yeah, so a lot of frustration around that. In that particular survey I'm referring to, 25% of children with siblings experienced face-to-face contact with at least one, but it did tend to be those in adoption, also adopted or in care, less with the birth family, such as the SGO example I gave later. But where we did see sibling contact, it was just so much positivity coming out in the examples on the survey, just how happy people were. Yes, there were a few more negative situations and people who paused it, but the vast majority of cases, people said it was really positive to see siblings together, to see them interact, to see them connected, or just to see them getting information about each other that really helped them. Again, I've got a whole webinar on sibling contact, which you might like to have a look at. But in adoption, even if we do have face-to-face contact, even if it's sibling contact, we can still be very restrictive with it. And one of the teenagers I spoke to in my special guardianship study was 7 when he was placed with his grandmother. His younger sister was about 2 or 3 and she was adopted. She's a half sister, she was adopted. And they did actually have face-to-face contact. Apparently the social worker fought for it because it was unusual. So the 19-year-old told me he was so grateful this social worker had fought for it. But he said it was set up to be once a year for 1 or 2 hours in a contact centre to begin with. So he's 7, his little sister is 2 or 3. And he says, he told me he thought it had to be like that in case he traumatized her, in case he stirred up difficult memories. And he said he found it limiting and awkward, and it absolutely didn't help them maintain their bond, not surprisingly. It certainly didn't meet the purpose of maintaining the relationship. But luckily that only happened for a few years. And when I spoke to him at 17, his sister's 14, they were Snapchatting each other, were seeing each other in the community a bit more frequently, and he felt he had a bit more of a brother-sister type relationship, but still more limiting because of that very, very limiting contact they'd had at the beginning. So yes, contact must be safe, but if we feel we want to maintain relationships, infrequent meetings can mean that you don't get those kind of family practices and it doesn't feel normal. And the messages that we're giving our children, that we have to set it up in this way because it might be unsafe, it might be damaging. The messages from the setting, I think, are really important to examine as well, and what they're making children feel. If they're feeling that it has to be set up in this very strange way, it doesn't help it feel good for children, feel positive. And that's what we need to think about. A lot more on planning will come into the next webinar. But what I'm going to do for the rest of this webinar is talk about the culture change work that we are doing with Adoption England, because what we are recognizing is that, yes, some of the stuff I've been sharing so far tells us that we should be doing something differently. But what we recognize is that the situation is very complex and we need to change the whole system around contact, not just one thing. What we certainly don't want to be saying is a simple thing like, okay, let's ensure the majority of children have face-to-face contact with birth parents. Now in New South Wales, that does pretty much happen. And yes, a large percentage say in the long term, it was actually, good to have it, but there were also cases where things were absolutely not good and children were harmed. So we really do need to take a very nuanced place, but also really look at the whole picture, because we know adoption is very complex and so many people are involved. There's more on that culture change in the paper that my colleague Beth has written in Family Law. I'll try and make sure you have the link to that. Vicky might be able to help in fact with that. What we recognise is that we need to change the whole system and really think about the values we need to put at the heart of the system. And really the value is, think about the adopted person. It is about them. Let's stop saying, well, we don't think the adopted parents will like this, or this is going to be hard work, or it's going to be complicated. What do our young people and adults actually tell us works for them? What do they want? Truly listen to them. And their key message is, it's about us. Let's make it about us. Let's put us at the centre of all thinking around this topic. We need to make sure we are rethinking risk, because we can be very risk adverse in adoption. Think about that situation with the special guardianship child who has been in her family with her grandmother. Was she really risky for that boy who was adopted? Are we overthinking risk? Some might say, well, the risk is she was seeing her mum. Yes, but why is that a risk? Let's question down the steps of risk and let's think, well, okay, what if she is? Birth mum knows where all her 3 girls is. What harm is going to be done if she ends up finding out where the boy lives? Let's really think along the different trails, and in some cases it could be really damaging, but let's really examine the risk and not assume risk that might not be there. We need to make sure we increase resources. We need to give this a priority because we've given other things in adoption a priority, which was very right. We've been focusing on delay, reducing delay, we've been focusing on recruitment, but we need to make sure we are really focused on this now, and we are, hence working with Adoption England. It's one of their 4 priorities in adoption. We need to change the unhelpful master narratives around adoption, our own assumptions, this idea of adoption being a fresh start. We need to really look into all that and start building understanding and collaboration between groups. But there are many barriers to change that are outlined in that article that we need to make sure we think of. Firstly, we have a large system of professionals involved. So we have, of course, the adoption team, who are most likely to have the best knowledge about the lifelong needs of the adopted person. They're the ones who might be supporting the teenagers who are desperate for information, need to find out, unhappy with their story, etc. But they are not often involved at the early stages. They're not often involved at the pre-proceeding stage where we're carrying out family group conferences, looking to see who is important to the child. They may just be handed a plan after court that they are feel they have to live with because they don't know the birth family, they weren't involved, and they just accept maybe what they're given. The frontline social workers, adoption is a very small amount of their work. They may be doing what always has been done. They may have poor relationships with the birth family as well, but also likely to have a good knowledge of the strengths and challenges of the birth family prior to removal. They may have a really good insight into the wider support network around the child. Are they really utilising that wider support network and thinking long term? Maybe not, because they are not. They don't tend to work long term with adopted people, so might not be quite aware that this aunt who doesn't even know the baby yet couldn't possibly care for the baby, but may actually be important for that child later on in life. We also have court professionals, of course. It's important to think about, they often just have to look at the plan they're given, but and think about hypothetical adoptive parents as well. That can often be one of the things that we hear about, comes up in court, is we don't know the adopters yet. We don't know if they're going to be happy with this plan. So we can be overall perhaps risk adverse as well with our thinking and planning around contact, and underestimating perhaps this risk of no contact, which can come up later because it's in the future, something we don't need to think about while we're in the heat of court proceedings. Fears of adopters. People worry that adopters won't like this. I referred to the Adoption UK Barometer last time, which picks up adoptive parents' views and does say that adoptive parents' mood is changing around contact, and they are becoming more aware that people may need to know about their birth family. Maybe some of this has been brought about because we have so many different types of families in society anyway. Many adopters will have divorced parents now, and be aware of the importance of keeping in touch with different people in their vastly different families. So they can come into this with perhaps more open attitudes now, but also they are often very led by what professionals, they trust professionals to make the right decisions. We've got the complexity around birth families and their needs, and the difficulty it is supporting them. We've got the issue that we often keep people apart, birth families and adoptive families. We keep them apart. They don't know each other. They often have never met. They can be fearful of each other. They're coming from very different worlds. And yet we know that contact works best when people collaborate well. They do understand each other. They understand why it can be difficult for this birth parent to write a letter, or that adoptive families really do want to include them and talk about them in their children's lives. We know that's important. We've been focused on other things, as I said, in adoption, and not this theme as yet, seeing it as something that's a big barrier, something else we don't want to deal with because we've got so many under-resourced areas in social care anyway, children's care anyway, and unhelpful master narratives. We still have this kind of traditional history around adoption that we've picked up about birth family being bad, fresh start, etc. So what we need to do, that we've recognised in our theory of change, is that we need to involve all groups in being aware that change matters, hearing from adopted people, and making sure the change happens. Hence, this is why we're doing webinars such as this. I'm running webinars to CAFCAS as well. We've done webinars to social workers across the country, managers, and we'll have principal social workers webinars for them and workshops for them too. So we really are trying to tap into all different sectors around adoption, making sure that we have accessible research findings. We've revamped our website of resources, which again, Vicky will be able to provide you a link with if she hasn't already. We have a whole website of resources for professionals, but also things that can be passed on to birth relatives or adoptive parents as well, to make sure that the research is out there, that people can access videos, etc. We're working with people to improve the way adoptive parents are prepared and trained. Again, making sure that they are listening to the teenagers and the adults who are telling them what matters. Adoptive parents will want to be the best adoptive parent they can be. They will want to be close to their children. So if they can hear adolescents saying the most important thing you can do is let me do this, let me see or hear about my birth parent, or keep open communication, then that's going to be important. We do need to make sure we build in support or find ways to access support. So we now have a map of support, for example, for birth relatives that the family rights group have put together, to make sure that birth families and the professionals working with them or in contact with them know where this support is. And they may need to hear about that support from what professionals they see as more independent, such possibly as an IRO. Depending on your connection with birth family, you might be the one who can connect them to support. They might listen to you in a way they might not listen to other people who are more directly involved in removing their child or working with them. We need to make sure we're building relationships between adoptive parents and birth relatives instead of keeping them apart, helping them really understand each other. So one of those things is that face-to-face meeting I referred to. We should be selling it as a really good thing and trying to make sure it happens in every case, if possible, with somebody from their birth family. And also not just think about the birth family, but also carers of the siblings. Do we get all carers of siblings, whether they're foster carers or kinship carers and other adoptive parents, together? Do we make sure that happens at the beginning, so they can say, okay, let's make a plan. Let's really consider this a priority. So we're bringing people together, building relationships from the very start, to make sure people connect, because it's people understanding each other, relationships, that really then help things to follow on. And yeah, focusing this on national level, agency level as well, and elevating, most importantly, elevating the voices of those with lived experience. Hence, I try and use a lot of quotations in my webinars, and we are, thanks to technology, we have really fabulous videos that we've done, that the Post-Adoption Centre have done, that the Family Rights Group have done. There are podcasts such as that by the Two Good Mums, who facilitated really good face-to-face contact between themselves for their boys. So we have a lot out there, and we need to make sure that people know about it and they're listening to it and working with that. So yeah, the first part was to really think about how we can involve all groups. So with local authority social workers, where adoption may be just a small amount of their caseload, but we need to make sure that they know about this too, that we are conducting training for these people. We have webinars, we're really making them think about this. We shouldn't just be doing a default option of, okay, it's adoption, that's easy, I can fill in that box and say it's letterbox. It absolutely shouldn't be just a tick box exercise. And our website does have a whole section of planning for contact, and I'll be covering that in the next webinar as well. As an IRO, we should be looking at make sure they know about these resources and have access to that. Adoption social workers and managers, folks, we should help them to drive change at the individual level, but also within their agency as well. And we are working with champions from regional adoption agencies across the country to be champions in their agency for change in this area. So they're coming to our community of practice workshops. If you don't know who those champions are, then Vicky Swift can help you know who they are or connect to them. Some champions are IROs actually who are coming to our community of practice meetings, who really see this as something they want to make a priority, and they're then communicating down throughout their agency to make sure this happens. Yourselves, of course, need to make sure that you're focused on ensuring links are not lost prior to adoption. So as well as checking contact planning, making sure people really are thinking about each individual case and not doing cut and paste. You also have a role right up to the adoption order. So even after the child has been placed within the adopted family, you can see how things are going. It's really important for young children that if the idea is to maintain a relationship such as between siblings, we don't want to let too much time pass so they become strangers to each other. We also need to make sure that you're checking up on things like those adult meetings that may not have happened, because as I saw in the chat, it can be really hard to make them happen after the adoption order. So this is a really critical and vital period to make sure things happen that haven't happened already. Have all carers of siblings got together? If you're aware of family members who were assessed as potential carers, what happened if they were ruled out because of health issues or because of their resources or because of their age? Were they then just discounted in this child's life, or did you make sure that was followed up as well? Okay, they can't be a full-time permanent carer, but what can they be? What could they do for this child? Even those who don't even know the child yet could be important. Legal professionals need to ensure the quality of contact planning is really thorough, and they also set the tone of the importance of this. I'm going to come back to that in a little bit as well. And CAFCAS too need to think about the lifelong needs of the child, not just the immediate court proceedings, but we need to be thinking about the law tells us adoption is for life, and we need to make sure that we are supporting birth parents or looking for where the support is for them as well. The areas of change that we're working on in this culture change project is this whole working nationally, initiating, leading on cultural change. I'll go through each of these, so let's jump over to that one now. So yes, we're working with champions in agencies where these champions are not only undergoing our training in the community of practice events, but they're then working in their agency to look at the values and the language that's used in that agency, on the website, in the materials, in the things that the adoptive parents read, in the language that's discussed in their agency, even the names of teams. I've seen a big transformation from what was called letterbox teams to now becoming keeping in touch teams. So just a simple change in label actually changes the focus. So what we do in adoption isn't just letterbox automatically. It's about keeping in touch and the right way for this child to keep in touch. So really thinking about how that language absolutely does matter. And the way that forms are set out, leaflets are set out, what impression do they give about what will matter and what should be done in adoption. Building relationships and collaboration with other professionals. So helping people work together. So the local authority, CAFCAS, local courts, all need to be on the same page. So if you are finding that you are coming across groups of professionals who are not on the same page, there are things out there to help them get up to speed with this and understand this, as I said, with webinars, websites, etc., etc. So it's up to us not just to accept people saying, oh, but we don't do this in adoption. It's about telling them, yes, there is a change going on, you're behind, you need to know about it. We need to make sure that people with lived experience are in those plans for culture change. So we're working with groups of people with lived experience to advise us on how we were doing things, and setting goals, manageable goals, because we can't change everything at once. And some local authorities or agencies I know are just focusing on small changes, like changing the keeping in touch changing the letterbox team to being called Keeping in Touch, and trying to think a bit more broadly about whether face-to-face could be considered in just a few more cases to begin with, without taking on a radical change, or trying to at least think about extended family a bit more, or trying to set up a few more of those initial meetings and not just thinking about them at the time of the adoption, but maybe 6 months later, 1 year later as well. So little changes, bringing in a whole session in adoptive preparation, changing, where they're hearing from people with lived experience, people who've managed very positive face-to-face contact, or a birth relative who can help talk about it and the difference it made to their lives when they were given help to write a letter or had a meeting with the adoptive parents. So hearing things, little changes. When we look at preparing and matching adoptive parents, first we need to think about the messaging at all stages, from the time they first click on a website, when they're thinking about becoming an adoptive parent. What do they see? What messages are given there? We need to be setting clear expectations that as an adoptive parent, you will do what is right for the child. And as Justice McFarlane said in one of his speeches recently, I can't remember if it was the Mayflower or the Potato lecture, but he has said that adopted children come with lots of needs. They might be dyslexic, they might have health issues. They need adoptive parents to meet those needs, and adoptive parents need to be ready to meet those needs. Having a need to still see your grandmother or to see your mother or your siblings is one of those important needs, and adoptive parents need to be ready to meet the needs of the child, and to know as well that this is a positive. We need to be careful how we speak to people, and not just set up this expectation of asking adoptive parents, would you mind, are you able to keep up a connection with a birth parent, but instead help them to realize that whatever is right for the child, we will expect you to do that. But also creating space for people to air feelings and anxieties. We hear all the time of adoptive parents who said, yes, of course I'll do this. We do know once the adoption order happens that sometimes things can change. We need to make sure that if people do have worries, they have a safe space to air those feelings. And again, that could be a time, a place for the IRO to hear things from people who may be struggling with issues, to check whether things that they said yes to in preparation or matching, what is really good, what do they really feel about this, what is going on behind what they've said. We need to make sure we are really aware that they know that openness is one of the most important things they can be doing, and that not having secrets, helping children to know this, is so important. I've spoken to many teenagers in my special guardians study who have actually very positive relationships with their parents, some of them very close bonds in some cases, particularly with parents who've recovered from their issues, but that doesn't stop them from saying, my special guardian is my mum, if they call her that, or nan, or dad, or granddad. But they absolutely feel that they're the ones they want to be with forever. They're the ones who've been there with them. So having another relationship with another adult doesn't stop you having that absolute secure bond with the person who has brought you up and raised you. And this is a really important message that we need to make sure we're giving. So all the fears and anxieties they might have, give them space to air them, help them to listen to people who've got experience, who can say, but this is what it was like. This is what I needed from my adoptive family. And using all the wealth of materials that we have, including our website, including all the material out there. And making child-focused contact plans, which I'm going to focus more on the next webinar, but just a few things that I know are going on in our wider culture change project. We know that adoption social workers are now trying to get involved at a much earlier stage by offering, for example, things like keeping in touch consultations for frontline social workers, providing training for frontline social workers. Perhaps there's a training package for new social workers who join the team, who might be unfamiliar with the new approach. So they're making sure there are many more links between the two. They might be supporting child permanence report writing. They might be supporting early meetings between adoptive parents and birth family members, for example. So getting involved earlier and helping with these. So that might be something that you're aware of or could help initiate in your agencies. Ensuring that all options are explored and rationale for plans are clear, which I'll be going on to a lot more later in the next webinar. Questioning risks, considering more creative options for contact. And having a positive search for the right adopters that we know are going to be really open to whatever is right for this child, which we would hope is all adopters anyway are going to do what's right for this child and that will do the right thing that they know is important for the best outcomes. And also maybe considering use of contact orders, particularly at the PO stage, and I'll talk about that on the next slide. So Justice McFarlane in his 2023 lecture did say, and this was within the context of saying, you know, the child's need for contact is just like any other need they might have, whether it's something connected to their culture, their health, their disability, their gender, their behavior. They come with needs, and a need to maintain relationships is one of their needs, and adoptive parents should be supportive of anything in the best needs of the child. And he went on to say that Section 26 may be helpful in particular cases because it's at the PO stage. It's not imposed on the local authority. It's imposed on the local authority. It's not imposed on the adoptive parents. So it might be said for the court to act in this way. It might hinder the task of finding prospective adopters who might be deterred by the idea of having some continued contact with the birth family in the future, or that it may compromise the autonomy normally afforded to adoptive parents. I do not agree that this should be an inhibiting factor in the court making an order where it is justified. The court's focus should be on the best interests of the child, not on those of potential hypothetical future adopters, who we hope are trained now in the right way anyway. By making a Section 26 order at this stage, as I said, it's only imposed on the local authority. We're going to review it at any subsequent adoptive hearing. Then we can hear the adopters' views. It will end at the point of the adoption order, and very, very rarely would we want to impose something long-term on the adoptive family. That's not what we do to people who are parents. So there generally is this reticence to do it at the adoption order stage. But by doing it now, we are setting the tone. We are saying that having a need for contact means that we need to, it really is important. It's been court affirmed. It's been set up as this is what this child needs. And it needs to be supported and started from the beginning. And also a recent case that I think is worth bringing up here as well was this particular case where the judge at the time had refused to make a placement order for 2 young children. So the local authority had wanted these 2 young children to be adopted, as we know is the best outcome for young children who can't be placed within their birth family. And yet the judge had refused because the judge had said that adoption is inconsistent with the child's need for continuing contact with the birth family. And in this case, there were 2 older siblings who had very close connection with their 2 younger siblings. So all 4 siblings need to see each other. Here we have a recognized need. But the first judge had said, okay, so we won't do adoption then because we don't get contact with siblings necessarily in adoption, particularly when those siblings aren't adopted as well. And yes, that is true. That's what the research says. It hasn't happened in the past. But then to be fair, it hasn't always happened in foster care either. But anyway, the appeal was overturned and the placement order was made with a Section 26 order that direct contact with siblings should continue. Obviously, that order will end when the adoption order is made. I don't know what's going to happen at that point. But the recital in the judgment was the local authority will search exclusively for and will match the subject children only with prospective adopters committed to facilitating their sibling contact as set out, and who will propose to adopt both these children. They accept that as a need for these children like they might any other need that these children have. So here we have a very clear example of where the judge is saying adoption can be with contact. It's not inconsistent. Things are changing, even if that has not been the case in the past. And we need to make sure that we make this very clear to prospective adoptive parents that it's a need you may need to meet as with any other need. And a key element, a little bit more on that case, a key element in the judge's reason was an assertion that permanence comes at a significant cost, namely the complete and irrevocable severance of all ties with the natural family. This is emphatically not true of many adoptions now, particularly in other countries. And it is at odds with the concept of open adoption, which is now embraced as a model in what the president had called the modern world. The judge overlooked that. The fact that it was his duty to set the template for contact going forward. So the mood is changing, the world is changing. These two children need a placement which will provide them with the greatest level of security and a family in which they can grow up feeling a sense of belonging. So real praise there for adoption. We still must do adoption. And we need, though, also a placement which will enable them to maintain a relationship with their brothers through that regular contacts. Long-term fostering can meet the latter, but not the former. So embrace adoption. It's still something really positive that we should be using and thinking about. It's good for children, but we also need to recognize that the breaking up of relationships is bad. It can be bad in many cases, and support those relationships where we can. And also not just assume that relationships will carry on in foster care either, because they don't always. What we need is parents who are really invested in doing the right thing for their child, whether they are foster parents, special guardians, or adoption, and really recognizing this is important. The other thing we should be doing, which I'll just go through very briefly because I've touched on this, these connections between adoptive parents and the birth relatives, whether it's parents or other relatives or siblings. We know that what makes good contact is where there are high quality relationships, where people understand each other, where they collaborate. And often we're keeping people away together. And from the research I know on early permanence, foster to adopt placements, they are a bit more together throughout the court proceedings. Adoptive parents do get to know the birth family in a way that other adoptive parents don't. And what we're seeing from some of that research in early permanence, we are seeing that they actually really get to understand birth relatives in a very different way. And for many people, it can make them much more empathic to the drug addicted parent, to the parent who just cannot parent, who's struggling. These are very different worlds for our adoptive parents, and they can struggle to understand. But having an initial meetings is really important. Also encouraging birth parents to use independent support services, really important, so they can engage rather than disengage. The tendency is to disengage. Their child has gone off to this new unknown world that they are now separated from, and then they feel alien from. We need to help them to understand that although they may feel so stigmatized and shamed and rejected, they are still valued and wanted in their child's lives. So by using independent support services, that can help them with that, or utilizing the support of other relatives in the birth family who can help that. We do need to think about using that placement order to adoption order stage to get contact up to a good start. So really paying attention to whether these meetings have happened, how are people feeling about each other, what do people know. As an IRO, you are likely to know the birth family as well as the adoptive parents. So you can help perhaps help them understand each other, help them understand why people might behave in a particular way, and connect. I know as a researcher, I sat through many interviews with birth relatives and many interviews with adoptive parents, and saw so many times how they completely misunderstood each other. And unfortunately, in my role as a researcher, I couldn't correct them. I couldn't put them right. I just had to sit and listen and accept what they were saying. But we need to help to connect people in some way, take a relational approach, facilitate people's connections. not just supervise them and make them think that they need to be kept away from each other, unless, of course, that needs to happen for safety reasons. We need to be supporting adoptive parents to be open with their child or teenager. We need to be making sure that there is a named person people can go to throughout the whole time as an adoptive family. And birth relatives too need to know that they can come back at any time, which could be when they suddenly get something out of the blue from their child in the future, an adolescent who's found them on Facebook. Not all birth parents, feel that's a good thing. It can really throw them and be very frightening, and they can worry about doing the wrong thing. We need to help both sides know that it's a tricky journey they'll be starting, and that they should not be afraid of asking for support in the future, because we know that contact needs to change to meet people's needs as they change. So everybody should be open to change, expect change from the very beginning. People change, the child will grow and change, but also the birth family will grow and change, and maybe recover from some of their issues, maybe have other relationships, other children may be born. What sibling connections may need to be known about in the future. So reviews are so important. It's never just it's going to be once a year letterbox and that will stay like that forever, or even a once a year face-to-face and it will stay like that forever. We know that relationships vary over time and can be awkward and tricky sometimes, but we need to be ready to support people to get through these issues and adapt contact at any point to make it more positive, to make it more comfortable if it needs to be, but also have the long-term view. Yes, sometimes contact can just be good and happy and work well for people throughout its whole time. Sometimes it can be tricky and awkward, but at least it can help people understand who they are. Sometimes it can feel really strange and weird and people can not know each other. But if we can make it just as positive as it can be, it can perhaps help people in the future. Sometimes there will be times where children, teenagers have too much to deal with and they just can't deal with contact. Their peers are becoming more important, or school is becoming more of an issue, and they can't take on birth family as well. And I've seen examples in some of our studies where adoptive parents have said, that's fine, but do you mind if I still carry on seeing or writing to or connecting to your birth relatives, just in case you want to come back to it in the future? And I found that can be really helpful to keep a link going rather than things just stop. And often adoptees really value the fact that their parents were happy to do that. So I know as IROs you are going to finish your work with these families at the adoption order stage, but I think it's really important to kind of see ahead into the future so you can keep that expectation, I guess, for the adoptive family, that things are likely to be a bit of a roller coaster and have ups and downs, and that's just part of adoption. And relationships, complicated relationships, but a long-term view is really important. I have some adoptive parents who say, I've written for 7 years, I've got nothing back. When should I, how long should I carry on for? Should I stop now? It seems pointless and meaningless. And I would also say you've got to keep on, because you never know when those letters might suddenly become important. You might suddenly get something back, or your child might just need to know that you carried on writing and keeping that door open for them for as long as you could. So yes, I know your time is limited, but expectations can be set for the journey that these people are on, so they can be ready for that. Okay, so I have a bit of time for questions. You'll get a copy of the slides as well, so you'll have many resources and things that I referred to on the slides as well.
So what about children from families who do not speak English as a first language and might be fluent enough in English? How will the contact be managed in a safe, inclusive environment where the children do not feel uncomfortable or embarrassed about their birth family's identities and encouraged to celebrate and be proud about their identities? So I guess this might be a bit of an open question for people. more generally to think about what they're doing in practice, mightn't it?
Yeah, I'd love to hear some ideas around that.
Question really prompts us to do, isn't it? Is to think about that really inclusive approach, and to, be asking those questions around children's developing identity over time, and how we hold on to, appreciate, and give full regard to to children's family heritage and ethnicity, and the importance of that. Michelle, do you want to come in?
I suppose I was just thinking about, ordinarily we'd have the use of interpreters, wouldn't we? But post adoption, we might not have access to that. So moving forward, I guess we need to think about how we get access to that. And sometimes it's through community organisations or adoption agencies may be willing to fund the use of Language Line or something like that, or opening up and thinking about other people in the family who might be able to interpret. So I think, yeah, I guess we should be, if children are being adopted from families who don't have sort of English fluently, how we can set up a structure that supports the use of interpreters, perhaps. But I think what Julie was saying earlier about everything being a sort of nuanced and case by case basis, I think that's really important. I suppose that I think the difficulty in with adoption is that post-adoption, case closed to many parts of the system, and that includes sort of funding streams as well as actual support. So the thing about sort of chasing up on contact and things like that, a lot of that lies within the hands of the adopters, doesn't it? And not necessarily, and they might not even know who they can go to within an organisation. I'm an IRO, so I work with a few families in relation to adoption, but that's, I don't work for an adoption team or organisation, so I don't know what the sort of plans are around that, really.
Yeah, I mean, it could be useful to linking in with your adoption agency and knowing whether they do, for example, send letters at particular times. I know some have started to send things out when the child approaches adolescence, pointing out that this can be a time of questioning things, and do contact us if you want to talk to us. You might like to watch this video of adolescence. So some are being more proactive, so they can help adoptive families be ready for things, and remind them that children do keep things to themselves, which we might know anyway, but it's just good to be reminded, because adoptive parents can think, well, they're not bringing it up, so I think they're not thinking about it. And just a reminder that this is so wrong. So people are doing different things, but yes, it's a reminder of, we have this critical period to work with adoptive parents before that adoption order. And we need to maximize that with expectations and training as much as we can to prepare them. Back to the
so can I just bring in Donald, because I'm just conscious we're running out of time, and it would be nice to hear the voices of some IROs here. And Donald has raised a good point that talks to that. Donald, I wonder whether you might want to come on and talk to the point that you've noted.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, this is I was just thinking that based on what we were discussing today, this is why I think face-to-face contact with birth parents is very needed, especially if there are parents with English who don't understand English, so that the children can grow to understand, more about their ethnicity and the language that their parents speak. And usually, right, as the years go by, parents tend to get to learn English. Right, so things will change, as things go by, and if not, then we could be looking at support, right? What support could be provided to these parents, right, to learn English. We have post-adoptive support. We have some money there, right, that we could use, right? Also, the children could learn their parents' language as well. So there's ways that we could get around it, right? It's just finding, social workers and IROs to think outside the box. When it comes to families with parents of different ethnicities and
And
language.
attending open days at, for example, mosques or temples, or joining in with celebrations could be a really lovely way to celebrate your heritage. And I like the idea of learning each other's language. Contact could be set around language games. Children
Absolutely. I
love
watched a video with Family Rights Group, a young person who'd been through, was in a kinship care arrangement, lost contact with her parents in India, and ultimately reconnected via Lifelong Links scheme, and ultimately learned the language so that she could have that communication with them. So like you say, picking up language as well, but brilliant. Can I just turn to go on Donald.
Sorry, I had I looked after a child who was just reunited with her birth father, and he started speaking his language with her. I mean, he could speak English as well, but he was sharing the different types of the vocabulary of the language that he uses with her, so that she could understand and learn as well. So it's a two-way street.
Brilliant.
Lovely.
Thank you. Can I just bring in Jackie?
These examples is great.
Brilliant. Jackie, do you want to come in? You're on mute.
Sorry, can you hear me? Yeah, now.
Yeah.
I'm an IRO from Stoke-on-Trent City Council. So the Section 26 orders really intrigued me, because some of the reviews, I'm sort of saying I agree with adoption on the principle that the siblings, if they're separated, need to keep in contact, and I think they accept that, but they say if we can find adopters that will do that. They don't say we're only going to find adopters that do this, and it worries me. The change needs to come a bit more within their own authorities and the social work, the child social workers, because I can recommend it, then they can still go to court, agree, put the plan of adoption, and sort of a little bit of emphasis of keeping siblings in contact. And I think when you've got a sibling group, whereas some might say in foster care and one goes to adoption, they need to insist that they're going to carry on contact. So it's really interesting to me, this Section 20 them orders, so I can sort of promote this, and that I can put it in my recommendation, not that they'll always take notice on me, but I can talk to the guardians around this as well. So it's really opened my eyes a lot more, because I'm very on board with this, but it's getting more and more information to use, isn't it?
Great. Well, thank you, Jackie. That's really good to hear. To hear that. That's helped thinking around that.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Okay. Anyone else want to come in? I mean, is it Chatha's first name? You've raised a point around face-to-face contact, or Manga, yeah, come in. Yeah, sorry, I don't know if I pronounced your name correctly. Did you want to come in?
Sorry, who was that?
Manga?
Me? Amanda.
Yes,
okay.
sorry,
Yes,
Manga.
okay.
Sorry,
Yeah,
I wasn't sure if I was
I'm a
pronouncing
permanent
correctly.
advisor in Dudley, which is an authority in the West Midlands, and I advise the ADM on adoptions when ADMs are being made re-adoption. Obviously, we can see that there's a great sort of there's not a change in the law as such, but it's very much how the courts are going to like Julie says, set the tone of this. And I'm thinking about birth parents, because like you say, you're trying to look into the future and trying to do life in a few, in some words and paragraphs, ready for a placement order, ready for an ADM. And it's quite difficult to do, other than to say this is what we think right now is in the best interest of the child, but it can't be set in stone. It is going to have to be reviewed. When we say that, I know in my resource, in terms of our region adoption agency, they've got about 3 people doing over 3,000 contacts, and it's just going to be really, it's quite something that a resource is going to be needed, because when you look at the parties involved, all of them are vulnerable in one way or another, and you're going to need quite potentially long-term support. Some children have got 12, 13 siblings. It's massive, really, in a way. And then you have to look at that balance on you know, how much will you interfere in the child's right to private life balanced against keeping in maintaining links with members of the birth family? And it's lifelong, as you say, certainly for the minority of the child's years. And we know children adopted are usually under 5, and therefore to like the next 12, 13, 14, 17, 18. It is so, I'm just anxious about that, you know, we want to make what should have been happening gradually over the years into a bit of a tsunami of a change that the courts want to see quite quickly. And I think for parents, in my particular stance, is that when we're making placement orders, they are at a very low point in their lives, and you know, it might be, they may change in the future, they may not, and that time difference between those placement orders and by the time children are placed for adoption, you could be looking at somewhere between, you know, 6 months to 2 years before an adoption placement is found, they've settled, etc. And then trying to bring in parents potentially or not. It's just, this is where I feel that there's great big unanswered questions. I know there may not be answers to it, but I just wondered what Julie's thoughts were on that.
Yeah, well, I'll just say a couple of things because obviously we're running out of time, and I'll try and pick up on a bit more of that next time. But firstly, there are some contact arrangements which actually people could just support themselves. Sometimes we over support by reading every letter or mediate every letter, and in some cases there have been examples of where adoptive parents are connecting more directly with things like email, where you can still have some element of anonymity with addresses not being shared, but you've got an email connection or other kind of digital connections. So if we only channel the support where it's absolutely needed and don't try and support everything where it's not necessary, then that's one thing which will help. The other thing is that's why I believe we do need to look at the extended family a lot more seriously, where we might have people who do have more stable lives because of this very issue you've raised about birth parents tend to have extremely chaotic lives. So really looking in the extended family, even if it's someone who doesn't have a relationship with the child right now as a baby, as an infant, but thinking about, or even the child might be older, but there's just this relative who has been a bit more in the background because of whatever reason, but actually could be a really valuable link. So if we can exploit or utilize is a better word, utilize the connections in the birth family, then that might take some of the pressure off agencies. Because we are aware of this, and it is being talked about on a national level by Adoption England. This is a fear. The other thing is little steps. Let's not have a big rush to 80% of contact arrangements need to be face-to-face now. It might just be, let's organise a few more initial meetings so people can connect together. Let's make sure that we improve the way we run letterbox contacts, so we do set up expectations better for adoptive parents. So we can encourage them to keep writing and keep presenting the right tone to birth relatives and encourage them to write back, maybe be more creative in our letter contact, send more things that are meaningful to each other. So work on what we can work on, but I'll come back to that next time. But thank you for raising that. I think we've run out of time now, so. But we have another webinar.
I think we have another webinar. So Heidi, I'm sorry, I see that you've got your hand up, but many of us, including myself, are rushing off. So pop it in the chat, will you? And we'll pick up next time.
I'll pick up next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Julie, and thank you so much, everyone. Great to see you. Thanks very much. See you next time.
Thank you.